Could the suppressor tax be going away? Well, that's certainly the hope here with what the House Ways and Means Committee has done. They released a draft text for the reconciliation bill that includes a change to the $200 tax on suppressors. Unfortunately, still leaves in place the unconstitutional National Firearms Act. But in to talk with us about this is Knox Williams, President and Executive Director for the American Suppressor Association. Knox, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you, sir?
Doing fine. So House Ways and Means giving you some hope here, some light at the end of the tunnel. Talk about the suppressor tax. Now, that's been around a long time.
That's correct. It's been in place since 1934 under what's called the National Firearms Act. And that's the law that was passed back then, 91 years ago, that regulates suppressors. It regulates short-barrel rifles, short-barreled shotguns, machine guns, destructive devices, things, explosives and things like that, as well as what's called an any other weapon, basically a firearm that is made to not look like a firearm. So this is a very old and archaic law, really symbolic of a lot of the government overreach during the FDR administration, and is a vestige of bad tax policy that we are trying to get suppressors removed from through the reconciliation process.
Yeah. So, I mean, suppressors aren't cheap anyway, and you add another $200 on them, and probably a lot of people don't buy them.
Well, we do have a lot of people that do buy them. That's because suppressors are one of the most effective ways to help protect your hearing while you're shooting. Earplugs and earmuffs are fantastic, but they also have their own limitations. We know that the overwhelming majority of hunters never wear hearing protection. That's why hunters are disproportionately impacted by things like noise-induced hearing loss and tinnitus. And even a lot of people, when they're out at the range, if you don't have a proper seal on traditional hearing protection devices like earplugs and earmuffs, you're not going to get the protection that you need to stave off otherwise preventable hearing damage. That's why groups like the Academy of Doctors of Audiology, National Hearing Conservation Association, and other medical groups all support the use of suppressors and their deregulation so that people can have better access to these safety tools.
Yeah. Yeah, I wear hearing protection when we go to the range, of course, but when you're out in the woods, that's how I'm really relying on what I'm going to hopefully harvest. I'll first maybe hear it before I see it. And so I can't have something over my ears. I don't even like to wear a toboggan, even though it's cold sometimes, right? So I want to be able to hear that buck grunt or whatever, a squirrel chirping, barking. I got to be able to hear them, and then I kind of know where to look. So a suppressor would come in handy at that point because I was young, standing beside my dad when he was taking me squirrel hunting for one of the first times, and he shot that old 12-gauge shotgun really right in my ear. I don't think I've ever recovered from that, Knox.
Yeah, you probably didn't. And hearing loss is both cumulative and it can happen instantaneously. So exposure to any noise as loud as any unsuppressed gunfire, the question isn't if it will cause permanent hearing damage, it's really to what extent. Different people are more or less susceptible based on your own physiology and your own anatomy, and also a host of different factors. And what we're trying to do is take away as many of those variables as possible. I do think it's funny. I'm the same way. I love to hunt. I've always thought it's comical that squirrels are the loudest creature in the woods. Out hunting bear in Maine, more times than I can count, I was positive that I had a big black bear coming up and it was just a squirrel rustling through the leaves. But there are electronic hearing protection options out there. I worked for a company that made them for 3 years, but you still have drawbacks in auditory situational awareness. So they're generally very good at being able to detect sound, meaning, I hear that something is making noise around me, but it's the sound localization, meaning I can hear that something's happening over there or over here. It's very hard to mimic an open ear condition. And really, suppressors are the only effective way to maintain that level of auditory situational awareness while still having a layer of protection.
So again, this ban or this tax rather has been in place for a long, long time. And if they would remove that tax, what do you think that would do to the industry?
So the industry is already in a pretty significant growth phase. Last year, there were about 746,000 suppressors that were transferred to civilians. To put that into context, when we formed the American Suppressor Association in 2011, there were 285,000 suppressors in the federal registry. It's called the NFRTR. And really, people think, oh, it's a registry so the government can track who has what suppressor, and it is used in that capacity, but it is justified. Its existence legally is justified as a registry of taxes paid. And I think that's a very important distinction when we're talking about the context of the reconciliation process. We're getting pushback from folks to say, oh, you're trying to push policy through reconciliation. No, we are trying to eliminate a tax, which is directly germane to this process. 285,000 total in the registry in 2011. That was every suppressor that was transferred to civilians from 1934 until 2011. And last year alone, we sold almost 3x that. There's probably north of 4.5 million suppressors in circulation in the United States right now. They're legal in 42 states. West Virginia, where you are, is one of them. You can hunt with them in 41 states. So I think that you and our listeners could probably guess which states are the ones where they're prohibited. Pick your most anti-gun states, your California, your New York, your Hawaii. And we're taking active steps to try and bridge that gap as well to get them legal in all 50 states.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's good. It's just so frustrating that, people have had to pay this tax for so long. What's that money used for? It's a federal tax.
Yeah. So when the National Firearms Act was stood up in the 30s, ATF didn't exist, right? So this was an offshoot of the Treasury, off the IRS. And that's why, as well, this is germane in our mind to the reconciliation process, because we're really talking about direct tax code. Eventually ATF took jurisdiction over it. But this all still goes straight to the general fund. ATF doesn't see a dime of the transfer taxes that they receive throughout this process.
Gotcha. But still, even if this goes through and the tax is removed, you still have what you call the unconstitutional National Firearms Act. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So the current provision that was dropped by the House Ways and Means Committee yesterday included a zeroing out of the tax for the sale of suppressors. So that means that they would still be part of the National Firearms Act umbrella. And what we're trying to accomplish is removal from the National Firearms Act entirely. And to accomplish that, we're asking people to encourage the House Ways and Means Committee to include what's called Section 2 of the Hearing Protection Act in the reconciliation process. Now, these members are going to know exactly what that means. They've been getting a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails from folks on that. But really, that is the section of the Hearing Protection Act, which is legislation we helped write 10 years ago that Representative Ben Cline and Chairman Crapo from Idaho are carrying in their respective chambers, that removes suppressors from the purview of the National Firearms Act. Now, if we remove them from the NFA, they would still be classified as firearms under the Gun Control Act. But instead of having to pay this $200 tax, instead of having your information collected and put on the federal registry, which again is a record of those taxes paid, you would be able to purchase these like you would any other firearm, like a rifle or a pistol, in those 42 states where they are legal. It would not make them legal in the 8 states where they're currently prohibited. Again, we're working on that through other mechanisms and other means. But in the 42 states where they are legal, if you're a law-abiding citizen, you walk into a gun store, you find your suppressor, you fill out what's called a 4473. They run the exact same federal background check, the NICS check that they run on suppressors currently under the NFA, exact same background check. The only difference is you're not paying that tax. You're not waiting an indeterminate amount of time for ATF to process your applications, and you're not on a registry.
Wow. So like you said, it's legal to use suppressors to hunt in West Virginia, also in Kentucky and Ohio. So that's good.
Yes, sir.
But what about those states where you have a hard time? Are you working there with the individual legislatures?
We've done a lot of work over the years. We've helped change dozens of suppressor laws across the country. And we've really honestly hit a point where, we're kind of hitting our head against the wall. Matter of fact, there's actually a hearing today in New York. Senator Ort is having a hearing on his legislation to legalize suppressors in that state. Obviously, we're supportive of these initiatives, but you look at the legislative composition in these states, and I just don't see a path right now to actually getting any bills through the legislature, let alone signed by their respective governors in these states. So we've shifted our focus more towards litigation. We have an active lawsuit through the ASA Foundation in collaboration with Silencer Shop, where we are challenging the constitutionality of the state ban of suppressors based on a post-Bruin environment. So we're basically asserting that, hey, these bans are unconstitutional. Therefore, they need to be overturned. And we're in the process we're about to file an additional lawsuit. I can't delve into any more specifics right now, but that is forthcoming as part of a comprehensive plan and strategy to ultimately work our way to the Supreme Court and hopefully get these things legal in all 50 states.
Of course, the left is going to oppose this. They oppose anything to do with guns. I mean, bump stocks, guns themselves, the scary looking rifles, anything. So certainly they're going to oppose the removal of this suppressor tax. When you have these debates with the gun grabbing liberals, what is their logic on suppressors specifically?
Spreading misinformation, honestly. My first question is, have you ever actually heard a suppressed firearm? And almost always the answer is no. And one of the things that we do is we invite people out to the range. Let's actually see and hear these things for yourself before we have a meaningful policy discussion. And we've had a tremendous amount of success. We've actually gotten a lot of bipartisan support at the state level as a direct result of that. Now, it doesn't always work, but at least we're able to have an honest conversation. But our opposition peddles in misinformation. This idea that if you put a suppressor on a gunshot, nobody will be able to hear the shot, no one will be able to detect it, and that's simply not true. Suppressed gunshots are still very loud. In fact, outside of the context of shooting, they're incredibly loud. Loud enough to the point that you should still wear hearing protection if you're shooting suppressed firearms in most conditions. And I really just don't understand how something can be, quiet enough that you can't hear it, but loud enough that you should still wear hearing protection if you're around it, right? That doesn't jive. It doesn't make sense. So these people are really counting on the fact that lawmakers and that constituents don't know what suppressed gunshots are. And it's easy in states where they're not legal because there's no exposure to them. So it's one of those things where for us, really breaking down the myths and the misconceptions is paramount. But man, it moves at a glacial pace.
Who are the champions of this in the House Ways and Means Committee?
We've got quite a few. On the House side, Ben Cline has really been carrying a tremendous amount of water. He's the lead sponsor for the Hearing Protection Act. On the committee, we've got some champions on there as well. And on the Senate side, Chairman Crapo, he has been an incredible champion. Somebody that we've been working with since 2017, I believe, when he first dropped the Senate version of the Hearing Protection Act. And now that he's chairman of Senate Finance, we're hoping for great things throughout this reconciliation process, being able to work with him in his office.
Yeah. Any reason to think that, Trump's going to support it, right?
I believe so. I can't imagine that the White House wouldn't support this. Yes, sir.
Yeah. I think that President Trump has been very friendly to the Second Amendment, but he did do the bump stock ban, which thankfully was overturned by the Supreme Court. But he's also, he talked about red flag laws. So there's some other concerns there. So far, how does your organization feel about the second Trump administration?
We feel great, and look, I think that it's important context to point out that, President Trump is directly responsible for the current majority that we have in the Supreme Court. Without him, Bruin never would have happened. And that really has changed the playing field tremendously in a pro-Second Amendment favor. You also look at the first executive order that we are aware of that was pro Second Amendment that they promulgated at the start of the administration. That's fantastic. And I think you look at things like the DOJ establishing the Second Amendment Task Force. That's another tremendous step towards trying to recognize the Second Amendment right and take proactive steps from the government to protect those rights for citizens across the country. I think it's been truly a breath of fresh air, and we look forward to seeing how else we can work with the administration moving forward.
Yeah. Any concerns, though, when Trump had talked previously about red flag laws? And I think actually Attorney General Pam Bondi was in favor of those when she was at AG in Florida. So any concerns there where you have to be kind of on the defense?
I mean, look, those prior statements certainly are concerning. But I think what we are trying to focus on organizationally is what we can do moving forward in a positive light for the Second Amendment. I don't want to harp on the past. People can change their positions, and it's my sincere hope that they have. I certainly can't speak for them, but we have a tremendous opportunity to really reshape the way that the executive branch interfaces with the Second Amendment. And it's my sincere hope that they take every active measure and continue to push for that with their powers.
Knox, you think it's a little ironic that when there's a pro Second Amendment president in the White House, and you got a Republican majority right now in the House and Senate, it seems like gun sales go down, and they don't want it this way. I mean, look, gun shop owners, I'm sure they're supporting the Republican Party platform. I'm sure they're supporting President Trump, but it's almost better for sales when Barack Obama or Joe Biden are in office.
That's absolutely right. Short-term sales, it certainly spikes, but I don't think that our industry would want to have it any other way. At the end of the day, protecting the Second Amendment rights is paramount. Everything else comes second to that.
Yeah. All right, good deal. And Knox, where can folks find more about the American Suppressor Association?
So if you can, today, visit us at hearingprotectionact.com. That's hearingprotectionact.com. We have a call to action to email your elected officials on the Hill and let them know, hey, we want suppressors removed from the National Firearms Act. The more emails, the more calls that we can get into those offices, the better that we're going to be. My one caveat is be polite. Being angry and screaming at these folks isn't going to change anything. We have to do this the right way, and the best way to do that is being polite yet firm.
All right, Knox Williams, President and Executive Director for the American Suppressor Association. HearingProtectionAct.com is a website to go to. Knox, thank you so much. Appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure.
The Tom Roten